U.S. National Institute of Health has awarded a 40 million rand grant to Stellenbosch University professor Frank Tanser, who is a leading scientist in HIV research. Tanza is to design future HIV prevention strategies for affected rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. His recent research has shown that there's been a substantial reduction, 43%, in new HIV infections in rural areas, but events including, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic have disrupted HIV care. Professor Tanser joins us for more on this story this morning. Prof, it's great to have you with us on the program. And this is certainly a good news story insofar as your own research is concerned. South Africa, with the largest HIV epidemic in the world, some 7.8 million people living with HIV here in South Africa. This is needed, right? It's the target here in South Africa to begin this research, and this is exactly where it needs to begin.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Morning and morning to the viewers. Yes, indeed. I think, as you said there, we've seen these substantial reductions in HIV, 43% of new HIV infections. However, it's a long way off from what we would ideally like to get, which would be elimination, and the target for elimination is 20 times less than the figure we're currently seeing for new HIV infections. So what this research seeks to do is to harness the changes in the epidemic. So the epidemic is changing quite rapidly. What COVID has shown us is that epidemics are hardly ever static, and HIV is no exception. It's changing by space, time, and demography. And so what this research seeks to do is to identify the new vulnerable groups that are going to be emerging as the epidemic continues to change, and then design interventions appropriately around those groups to kind of maximize those a reduction in new HIV infections. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're always saying that the face of the HIV epidemic is always changing, and so our existing interventions also need to change with it, right, Prof? But when we say it's always changing, what are some of the things that are influencing those changes?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is changing. And one of the things that our research has shown is that one of the greatest problems in HIV for many years has been the high rate of new infections in young females. And what we've seen, which is fantastic news, is that the reduction in new HIV infections has been particularly large in those early age groups, young females and young males, which is exactly what we want to see. But what that has meant is that it's shifted the burden of new HIV infections to increasingly older age groups. And so our programs are going to need to expand their sort of demographic targets to be able to target those older age groups, for example, which are going to require a whole kind of different implementation approach to what we see with the younger ages. But that's an example of by age, but also by space. So a lot of my research has been involved in kind of identifying particularly vulnerable communities. And what we're expecting to see is that as the epidemic evolves, new HIV infections are going to increasingly concentrate in sort of peri-urban communities, urban communities, and those have quite different strategies from rural communities, for example. So we're going to be able to need to monitor those shifts and kind of design intervention strategies appropriately.
Yeah. So those are the shifts in the face of the epidemic. Insofar as, South Africa being number one, it's the one thing that we don't want to be leading in, but we're leading in the number of HIV infections in the world, right? What makes us hold this position, Prof? Why are we here in South Africa leading here?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword in a way, because firstly, South Africa has had one of the highest rates of HIV incidence in the world. So that's new HIV infections, and that's partly led to the large number of infections that we see today. But the other sort of dynamic that is going on is that antiretroviral therapy has obviously massively reduced mortality. And so instead of people dying of HIV, they're obviously surviving. And so that pool of infected individuals is kind of continuing to grow. And in some ways, that's a good sign because it means people are being kept alive. So it's the dual impact of high rates of new HIV infection, which is what this project is seeking to reduce, but also the sort of counterbalancing impact of reduced mortality brought about by the hugely successful antiretroviral therapy program.
Right, right. I suppose it also then gives us an opportunity. There's an opportunity here, and I suppose that's where your research also comes in. There's an opportunity to show the world how we can sort of drive those levels of HIV infection that we're seeing in South Africa lower.
That's absolutely right. I think and that's why I'm so excited about this project. And we've got a fantastic team in place across the world to help us with this. But we can, I think, show the world how to drive this epidemic to low levels of endemicity. This is the time when we must not take our foot off the throat of the epidemic. This is the time to drive home the advantage.
Yeah.
And I think South Africa can show the world how to do that. So that is one of the reasons we are so excited about this award.
Yeah. We're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and one of the big issues was the disruption to care, not only in HIV, but in other lifestyle diseases as well, things like diabetes, tuberculosis. It all had a major impact insofar as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned. With HIV, have we come out of that now, post-COVID-19?
I think it remains to be seen, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this research, is to actually measure what impact those kind of disruptions to healthcare have had on particularly new HIV infections. And new HIV infections are quite difficult to study because one needs to have a cohort of HIV negative people, follow them up for a long period of time, and look at kind of new infections arising in that cohort. And the population cohort that we're working with in KwaZulu-Natal is one of the largest in the world. And so it is actually very difficult to measure those impacts, and that's one of the things we're going to be doing to see what, the extent to which the people not adhering or the disruptions caused by COVID have actually had an impact on new HIV infections. So that's one of the sort of things that are going to change the dynamic of the HIV epidemic. One of the things we're studying, but remains to be seen exactly the extent to which that has impacted new HIV infections.
Yeah. So your mandate now is, and I'm reading from the information that I have here in front of me, to design future HIV prevention strategies for severely affected rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. It's 40 million rand over a 5-year period. From what you've just told us this morning, Prof, I feel like 5 years is perhaps not a very long time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. However, because we have such an excellent setup at the Africa Health Research Institute in northern KwaZulu-Natal, where this a lot of the project is going to take place, we're in the process of already starting to monitor those changes and to design intervention strategies appropriately. So I think towards the end of those 5 years, we will have a really clear idea of what we need to be doing in order to show the world how to drive this epidemic to low levels of endemicity.
Yeah. Professor Frank Tanser, let me thank you for your time this morning. Great to talk to you, and we hope to check in with you in the next, shall we say, couple of years. You'll give us a sense of how things are going with your research. Frank Tanser is a leading HIV research scientist, being awarded a 40 million rand grant by the U.S. National Institutes of Health.